Hi, welcome to Mocha Wave Talks. Here we are, episode 4. I'm really excited. Here at Mocha Wave Talks, we believe that everyone who reads has their own magic. I'm really excited today because I'm here with Tilmer Wright, who is an award-winning author. And I recently met him, and I've just been really interested in the discussions we've had about writing. So would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself, Tilmer.
Yeah, sure. I'm an IT professional by trade. I've been in information technology for well over 30 years now. But writing has always been a passion. I've been writing ever since I was a kid, but you write little stories for your friends and you do that sort of thing. I didn't write my first novel until about 10 years ago. And now I have 2 novels out in the wild. And I have one that I've just finished, and I'm in the editing process for now. But it's always been a nice outlet for me. I write because I love to write. I write because I want to leave footprints in this world, something other than just an obituary when I leave, for people to look back on and say, okay, this person did something. Books endure, right? They outlive us.
Yeah.
And so I have a great passion for it. I love to read. I read voraciously all the time, and that fuels my writing. Every time I read something good, it makes me want to write more. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
Well, that's amazing. I know that, in my other role, I'm an author, but I'm also an English professor, and I just love it when I have a student who finds the connection between their writing and what they're reading and learns from an author, to be able to analyze it and see what is it about it that they like, is it about it that calls to them.
Yeah. And to me, what makes great writing is great characters. I've heard people try to say, well, I figure out my plot and my characters follow it. And I'm like, that's kind of backwards to me. To me, great characters will write the story. Great characters will drive the plot. I've had plot changes in my own work because a character has become so strong that it doesn't make sense what I was thinking. The character changed my mind. It's almost like I had an argument with the character, and the character wins, and the character should win.
Yeah,
because you want your readers to care about your characters, because that makes them turn the page. What happens next? So strong characters are paramount. It's the number one.
So, and that's one of the things when we're analyzing literary fiction, we're looking at what made this character come to life to you. It's kind of like sometimes what I do is I'll draw on the board a little stick figure, and it's like, well, how can we make this stick figure come to life, right? How can we make this stick figure something that we actually care about? What layers do we need to add? So what are some of the things that you do to take just a person and make them not just a cliche, not just a stereotype, not just one-dimensional?
Right. Well, 2 things. First, the stick has to have some flesh on it, right? You have to build up the layers that make that character. But the other thing that's really important is the character has to be consistent. They have to be true to themselves. You can't have a character that, has these, certain traits about them, and then they do something that's contrary to that. Readers will notice that. They'll be annoyed by it. It would annoy me, right? So there are a few things that I will do, like, to reinforce that sort of thing. One of the things that I personally will do is I'll call back, to something earlier in the story. You'll be traveling along in the story, and then there'll be a recall to something that happened earlier, so that you draw a thread, between the 2 events. And you're like, oh, well, that makes sense. They did this because I remember them doing that back in chapter 3. Now in chapter 30, they do this, and it makes sense, And so they're on this path. You have the whole story arc, but you're going to build relationships as incrementally as you go along. Things happen, people come and go, and all of that adds another layer of flesh onto your character. But that whole consistency thing is huge. One one of my favorite books of all time is Fahrenheit 451. Ray Bradbury wrote, and he has a really interesting character called Guy Montag that's in that story. And he's a fireman, but a fireman in Fahrenheit 451 means you have a hose that instead of spewing water, it spews fire, and he burns books, right? So he's very dedicated, and he's very proud of his job, right? And he's very proud of it because he thinks it's socially important. It's like part of who he is. He's like, I do this because it's a very noble thing to do, because this is good. Burning the books is a good thing. He's very convinced of that. Part of that problem is he's not a very good independent thinker, but that's just part of who he is, right? It's believable. He has a wife who's like an every person, I guess, and she's like just toddling along, and she buys all the propaganda, and she's like, she's a straight arrow, right? In society. And then he has this kind of a hippie next door neighbor girl who starts to open his eyes, and he starts to question everything, It's like, and he questions it, but the character of Guy Montag knows, well, whatever's right, I have to be doing, So he does things, and in the end, I don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't read this book, but there's some pretty outrageous things the guy does, as toward the end of the story. But when you think about it, you're like, well, wait a minute, this makes perfect sense, because I know who Guy Montag is. I've been told who Guy Montag is this whole time. And basically what's happened is his perception has changed, but he's still Guy Montag. So he still has to be that. It's brilliant.
That's a magical moment when you find that a character that's come so to life that they can change, but that change is totally within
correct
their character.
Right. The parameters are all there, and he's still within those, even though he's doing things completely, out of what would seem like out of place, but they're not, because you understand what's happened to him over the course of the story. So, I mean, that's brilliant. But, another like device that I use is, I call it mini stories. I've even written little pieces for characters that never appear in books. I like write a little sketch, and it might not even have a plot. It might not even have a story. It's like a day in the life of, Mary Smith. This is what she does, and it just like fleshes that character out of my mind. So when I write about that character, I know who it is, and I start putting those elements in as the character gets built.
I think that's really interesting, because that sounds kind of maybe simplistic on the surface, but when you think about it, when you take a moment in time in somebody's life, there's a lot that goes into that moment. Like, what happened in their life to make them like that, right?
Right.
What type of person are they? What social, what society, are they from? What environment? All of that is going to play.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a lot to think about when you're writing that. That's awesome.
Right. And it can get really incredible when a character in your story starts realizing that about other characters, right? That's when the real dynamic starts to happen, and it's like the story I'm working on now. I have a character, and it's a young kid. He's 11 years old. And it's my first foray into a couple of things. One is first person narrative, and one is the narrator being a child. And he's like this precocious child, and he thinks he knows everything, right? And he thinks he has all these preconceived notions about everyone and everything. But as the story progresses, he's awakening to more of what you're talking about. Why do I think this about this person? Why do I think this person is that, and this person is another thing? And the experiences shape that through time. And so, that's like the mini story concept, that I use like that. I will put that in the books sometimes, and this book has them, and my other books have them. It's like, they always say to show, not tell, right? You don't say, Bob down the street was mean, right? Okay, why do I believe that? What makes him mean? Or Sally over on the other block, she's a really nice lady. Okay, great. But why is that, right? So if you intersperse, and you can't like get off your track, right? But if you write little passages that say, this one time this person did this or this person did that, then the reader was like, oh, I kind of get an idea of this character now.
That guy's mean, right? Or that lady's nice.
Yeah. And because I know that, I care a little more about this character than I did. And I'm more interested. I'm more engaged. Engaged readers is what you want. You want them to keep turning that page. What happens next?
But it's so funny because when we're going to write, we forget everything we know about life, it seems.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think writers sometimes get too bent on getting to the end of the story, and it's like we see where it is and it's in our head, right? And we know, but readers don't. They can't read our mind, right? So they have to be able to see the full portrait, the full painting, with everything in it, so that they can make sense of it. Or else, people, you talk about things like continuity. A lot of that is sometimes lost because it's in the author's head, but it never makes it to the page.
I need to be really aware of that as a writer, because I tend to be a pantser. So like making stuff up as I go along. Wait,
oh yeah,
I need to make sure this is consistent.
Yeah, it's fine. The seat of the pants approach is fine. It's just you have to, when you go. This is where other readers come into play too. Like get somebody else to read as you go. Does this make sense? And they'll point these holes out to you. They're like, why did this person do this? This doesn't make sense. And you're like, oh wait, I was thinking that. I just didn't illustrate it for the reader.
Right.
Yeah, just get in their head for like a few hours. Just sit down and like, I am this character. What am I doing today? It's almost like acting when you think about it that way. You read about actors like Dustin Hoffman who would like get into character and like just live that character for a month or whatever, or 2 months, or over how long. And people were like, it's like he was a different person, and that's what he was doing. He was like getting into that character, know them intimately. And writers need to do that with their characters as well. You put on that mantle of that character and you become them. That's the best writing to me.
That's a great analogy. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
If you'd like, I can share a mini story example that's from my upcoming book. My upcoming book is the title is called Talus Gate, and it's a young adult fantasy, multi-world kind of fantasy. And my main character and narrator is a 11-year-old boy named Troy Cooper, and he has just introduced his mother in the story. And his mother is described as being, a loving person, a nice person, but very protective of her children, right? As mothers should be on one hand, and tend to be. But he's, in order to explain what he's talking about and to actually embellish his own character at the same time, I introduced a little mini story, and it'll just take a few minutes if you'd like for me to read that.
Please, I would love to hear.
So, yeah, you'll have to pardon that my eyes avert from the camera because I do have to read it. I don't have this all memorized.
That's good. Go for it.
Okay, so this is Troy speaking. He says, this one time, I nearly got expelled for setting Leonard Carlin's shoestring on fire in the gym. It wasn't in self-defense or even in retaliation for something Leonard had done. I just don't like him. Leonard's big. He's bigger than most kids at school. He's even a little bigger than some teachers. He likes to throw that weight around a lot. I'd seen him pushing Jeff Dunn around earlier that day, probably for no good reason, other than satisfying his own twisted ego. Jeff's a good kid. He never bothers anyone. He's average size, kind of a bookworm. He's not my level of bookworm, but he's a reader. Leonard sneaked up behind Jeff in the hallway between classes and slapped a library copy of To Kill a Mockingbird out of his hand. Not only was that just mean, but it was an assault on one of the finest pieces of literature ever created. I had to do something. We had some kind of assembly in the gym that day. I can't remember what it was about. Anyway, Leonard was sitting in the row of bleachers behind me. They're the portable kind that collapse against the wall when they're not being used to bore students to death with presentations about stuff like fire safety. They're notoriously uncomfortable. If you're tall like Leonard, it's nearly impossible to cram your feet into the space they belong. As a result, Leonard's grubby, once white left Converse was parked right next to my right hip. I got an idea. Coincidentally, I'd found a scuffed up disposable cigarette lighter on the sidewalk coming into school that day. At least 2/3 of the teachers at my school smoked, so I figured one of them probably dropped there on the way in. I scooped the lighter up. I slid it into my pocket without even breaking my stride. I knew it was something to get me in trouble should a teacher find it on me, but I took the chance. I fished the lighter out of my pocket and rolled the thumb wheel to generate a flame. Before anybody noticed what I was doing, I touched the fire to the frayed shoestring on Leonard's shoe. It smoldered a bit before taking off into full flames. The cuff of Leonard's jeans was involved before he noticed what was going on. He leaped up, screaming and smacking his foot and leg in an effort to smother the fire. He ended up falling on top of some other kids before it was all over. I felt kind of bad, but not for Leonard. He's a jerk. But I could have really hurt someone pulling that stunt. It was dumb. I didn't get away with it. Some other kids saw me tucking the lighter back in my pocket, and it was obvious that somebody close to Leonard's foot had to be the guilty party. I got hauled into the principal's office, and a phone call was made to my house. Mom had to come down to the school. I didn't actually lie to Mom about what happened, but I kind of let her believe I'd acted out against Leonard because he bullied me instead of Jeff. I wasn't entirely incorrect. Leonard had bullied me a bunch of times. I know I told Mom about some of them. She knew about him and how he behaved. She came in ready to fight. Before the principal could even get started, she was railing about how bullies picked on me all the time because I was so smart and small for my grade. By the time it was over, Mom had successfully painted me as the victim in the whole ordeal. It was amazing. I still got in a little trouble. I had to apologize to Leonard, and Mom had to pay for Leonard a new pair of shoes and jeans, but she never gave me a lot of grief about it. I got a lecture about playing with fire, but all things considered, it ended up pretty well for me. So that's a little story.
I love it.
Yeah.
One thing I noticed that what you're doing there is he's talking about somebody else.
Yeah.
We're learning more about him.
Yes.
That's so hard to write first person without saying,
Yes.
like, I'm like this and I'm like that. And
Right.
it's so much more.
Yeah.
I love what you did there. That's such a clever move there.
Yeah. I write about people, right?
Uh-huh.
People say, what are your books about? And I've written, like, my first book was a science fiction book, but not like Star Wars. It's like a first contact kind of story.
Mm.
My second book also kind of fell in science fiction. It's more of a techno thriller, but it's really more about a teenager girl and her father, and that relationship, and this book, it's a multi-world fantasy, but when you boil it down, it's more about two 11-year-old kids, a boy and a girl, who are best friends, and that relationship. That's what it's about. So I write from a very human angle. I think that's more, the genre is a backdrop, right? Mm-hmm. But what engages people is the humanity of your writing,
And like you said, in order to connect to those characters, to feel that humanity, it takes that strong sense of character development. You need to really know those characters.
Right.
I really like that.
Right.
So the two books that you already have published, Mote and Bit Dance, where can someone get them if they want to read those?
They're on Amazon, both paperback and Kindle for both of those. And they're readily available. You can search for my name, or you can search by those books for those books individually.
And when do you see your new book coming out? Do you have a projected date, or?
I'm desperately wanting it out before the end of the year. I just finished first draft, and I'm going through my pass at editing, mm-hmm. And then once that's done, I'm going to do another read straight through, start to finish, just to try to see if there's any more, if there are any more like obvious bugs, right? And then I'll be engaging with some beta readers. I've got a couple people raising their hand already, so that'll be the next step. And then I'll have to engage my cover artist once I get a little closer. So I'm hoping I should have it before the end of the year.
Okay.
I mean, it'd be great to have it by the end of, say, September, but I don't know if that's realistic. It might be more like October, November, but
So is there
certainly before the end of the year.
Is there a way people can follow or stay up to date with what your progress?
Yeah, it's a place where I'm really not the best at my own self-promotion. I do have a website.
It's hard for a writer to do that.
Yeah, I have a website, tilmerwrightjr.com.
Okay.
I also have a blog. It's called Uncle Tilmer's Story Hour. It's on Blogspot. So that's I don't keep that up as much as I should, but on the blog I will announce things like books being available. So if you follow the blog, you definitely will know when the next book is out. And you can read some little stories from me there. I have a few short stories on that blog, and I have a lot of like essays. I'll write essays about life and about things that have happened to me. Some of them humorous, some of them not.
So thank you so much, Tilmer, for joining me today. I'm really excited. I learned something too.
Yeah.
And I think my viewers will have learned something also. I'm so glad to have had you. And I'm looking forward to seeing your new books and finding out more about, I'm going to look into the books that you've already written, the Dance and Mote, right?
Yeah, Motes is the first book, and The Bit Dance is the second book. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk. I love to talk about writing. I love to talk about my books. It's my passion. So
we'll have to do this again sometime.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.